Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to Rituals Womanhood, the podcast that explores the art and science of women's health. We have such a good episode today. I am so excited. This episode was literally just a divine download that came to me last night, and this is so huge. And what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about how we evaluate diets to understand their quality and to understand what is the optimal way of eating for human health. And we're going to be talking about why nutrition research is so challenging, but also what makes a compelling nutrition argument. And we're going to be speaking primarily about a way of evaluating diets called nutritional geometry. So this is going to be a really good episode. And this episode is inspired by the fact that when I speak about limiting protein intake, limiting animal protein intake, eating more plants, when I speak about that online, believe it or not, it's a very controversial opinion. And a lot of people have a lot to say about that, about it. And it's mind-blowing to me. But I think what's important to remember is that when most people are confronted with a new idea that challenges something that is central to their identity, and food is central to people's identity, they will defend their belief to the death, even if that belief has just been handed to them and they haven't even done the research themselves. They will defend that belief to the death because they want to preserve their sense of self so badly. That's most people. And so when people come online and I have a video where I'm talking about eating more plants and eating less animal protein, and they comment under the video that I shouldn't be a dietitian, that I'm a moron, all of these crazy, intense, violent things, and a lot of them are men, let's be real. The reason they're doing that is because I am presenting an argument in a way that actually makes sense to them. Maybe for the first time. And maybe they feel threatened because if the argument makes sense and it's true, that would mean that they would have to change something central to their identity. They'd have to change their thinking. And most people don't actually want the truth. They want the reassurance that their way of thinking is good. They just want reassurance. Most people in life, in relationships and in interactions with other people, for better or worse, are really just looking for external validation and reassurance. This is another reason why I love shadow work. This isn't an episode about shadow work, but one of the reasons why I love the practice of shadow work, which is a personal development practice that is so easy, but uncomfortable because you have to see things from a different point of view. You have to be willing to evaluate your own way of thinking. You have to be willing to evaluate your own concept that you have about yourself. But another reason why I love shadow work is because you can get to a place where you are not triggered easily at all. And so when people are commenting under a post saying something horrific, that's about them, right? That's them being triggered by something I'm saying. They're having an extreme emotional reaction to a girl on the internet talking about eating less animal protein. And it's fascinating because there's lots of vegetarians and there's lots of people that talk about plant-based diets on the internet. But, and I could have a whole conversation about why I think they're triggered by me in particular. But a big reason, the primary reason why they're more triggered by me than they are by other people is because I'm authentic and I'm confident in what I'm saying. And authenticity is the most magnetic vibration in the universe. And if you are operating in a frequency of authenticity, you will trigger people that are not operating in that frequency, because that's your job on this planet, is to pull people into their authenticity. If you are an authentic being, your job on this planet is to make people think about if they're living their lives in alignment with who they are at their core. That's why people get so triggered. And I'm not the only person that triggers people. Lots of people who radiate the frequency of authenticity are incredibly triggering. Anyway, this episode was inspired by all of these haters because, anybody who's ever said anything worthwhile since the beginning of time has had haters. If you're not saying something polarizing, you're not actually saying anything. So I don't view this as a negative, that what I'm saying is making people feel a certain way. I view that as a positive, that the message is persuasive enough that they are having a reaction to it. The other aspect of that is that people within, if you're an expert in something and you're within a certain field, I was talking to my mom about this morning. Some of the comments that, even for me, like, I don't get triggered by these comments because I understand shadow work, but the only comments that trigger me slightly are ones from other dietitians or other medical professionals. And those comments were triggering to me because I needed to understand why they were happening. But they were triggering to me because I care so deeply about the dietetics profession and about evidence-based medicine and about disseminating accurate health information to the public. My background is in public health nutrition. I care so deeply about that. So when I see other professionals saying that I don't deserve to have a license, yeah, I have a little bit of a reaction to that. And so when I get triggered by something in life, I think about it. And I think about why I'm having that reaction, because I can neutralize that reaction by understanding where that person is coming from. And when other people in a selective field are so triggered by someone in their own field, that is just coming from a place of jealousy. That's all it is. It's a place of jealousy of, wow, her ideas are original and I am not going to have original ideas, and so let me bring her down. When I used to go to diabetes conferences, there was this incredible guy named Stephen Ponder, and he was like kind of like a rogue dude. Like, he wasn't associated with any particular medical institution, and he spoke about really progressive ways of managing diabetes. He had like his own method to it, and I thought he was the coolest dude ever. I thought he was a genius. But lots of people would watch his presentations and they would just talk shit about Stephen Ponder, and just because who was he to say what he was saying when he's not affiliated with a medical institution, and he's saying something different from what the American Diabetes Association is saying. And so that memory came to me this morning, and I was like, oh, I'm Stephen Ponder in this situation. I'm saying something progressive. I'm saying something radical. I'm saying something that is fucking cool. And that's why other people in my profession can be triggered by it, because maybe they don't have an original thought. Who knows? All right. So that's what I got to say about that. In listening to this podcast, you will come to know me, and you will come to know that I am super vulnerable on this podcast. I don't have much of a filter in life. Definitely on the autism spectrum in some way. Like, I don't do social convention very well. I just speak my heart. So when I'm saying any of that stuff, nothing is ever coming from a negative place. It's only coming from a place of my own processing, to be honest, and just wanting to let you know why I'm so passionate about the things that I'm passionate about. I think it's important, the context. Okay, so let's talk about nutritional geometry. Last night, after all this went down, I always clean when I'm like a little like stressed out or when I'm thinking about something. And so I was organizing my closet, and I had this like intuitive hit to go on Google Scholar and to look up articles about protein and see if there was anything new. I'm familiar with most of the articles, but I wanted to see if there was anything new. And there was something that stood out to me. And it was an article talking about protein in the context of human nutrition. But specifically, they were talking about a certain like framework of evaluating research papers called nutritional geometry that allows people to get a more comprehensive picture of what's actually going on in human nutrition, so that we can compare studies in a more equal way, in a way that is that makes sense, that we can draw conclusions from. And I was immediately like, oh my gosh, this is just like divine inspiration, download into the brain, whatever you want to call it, because this is going to blow your mind and help you explain where I'm coming from when I talk about the fact that we should eat less protein as a society, And when I talk about eating less protein, I'm not even talking about like that protein is bad, but the reason people interpret it that way is because for a long time, basically forever in human nutrition research up until extremely recently, we have studied nutrition in terms of a single nutrient approach. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee. And so when we're studying nutrition in a single nutrient approach, of course, when I talk about one nutrient, people are going to assume I'm demonizing it because that's what we're used to seeing, which is interesting. But there's such a problem with the single nutrient approach and with the fact that we've studied, low fat diets and low carb diets and low protein diets. We've studied all these macronutrients in isolation. The problem with that is that that's not how nutrition works. We don't eat single nutrients as people. Nutrients interact to influence human health. Nutrients interact when we're cooking. Nutrients interact in the environment when they're being created. Nutrients interact in the human body when they're being digested. Nutrients interact. And so studying a single nutrient in isolation is virtually useless. And this is why the majority, when people talk about, well, high protein diets are better for weight loss and high protein diets have evidence behind them, the evidence that they're referring to, in my opinion, is kind of useless. Because what a lot of the evidence is it's looking at, let's compare a high protein diet to a control. Let's compare a high protein diet to a low fat diet. Let's compare a high protein diet to a high carb diet. Both of those studies are useless to me. I'm going to tell you why. Because if you compare a high protein diet to a low fat diet, I have no interest in a low fat diet. I have no interest in what's happening in a low fat diet. Why? Because at this point, we know that low fat diets are like not the vibe. They've been disproven at this point. I don't have any interest in comparing a high protein diet to a high carbohydrate diet. Why is that? Well, because not all carbohydrates are created equal. Because there's a major difference between a high carb diet that's comprised of white bread and Dunkin' Donuts, muffins, and a diet that's comprised of quinoa and chickpeas. This is the problem with the single nutrient approach. I don't have interest in these studies. I don't find them compelling because they're not actually studying human nutrition in the way that it happens in life, which is through synergy. When we study single nutrients in isolation, we neglect the art of food. There are things about food that we haven't discovered yet. There are components of food that are invisible to us. There are interactions happening in synergy that we don't know about yet. So it's not enough to just study the nutrients. We have to study the foods themselves in the way that humans consume them, which is in patterns. And what is the most evidence-based eating pattern on the planet? Hands down, no debate here. Zero debate here. The Mediterranean eating pattern. Do I think the Mediterranean eating pattern is the best diet in all of human health and all of human history? I don't know. But it's the most evidence-based eating pattern that we know of. And the results are good. So I feel good following it. Because a Mediterranean eating pattern prevents cardiovascular disease by over 30% within 3 months. A Mediterranean eating pattern prevents type 2 diabetes, is the best eating pattern for long-term sustainable weight management, is the best eating pattern for anti-aging and limited lowering mortality. The Mediterranean eating pattern has the most evidence behind it, the highest caliber and quality of evidence, because we've taken a diet that made sense to study, because we studied a diet that has been associated with longevity in human populations for a really long time. And we studied it in a way that is replicable, because it's very specific. And we actually captured synergy of an eating pattern. I'm very interested in studies comparing high protein diets to Mediterranean eating patterns or plant forward eating patterns or plant based eating patterns. And guess what? Every time that happens, the plant eating patterns win hands down every time. So, the problem with studying single nutrients is that it is a crazy oversimplification of nutrition to the point where it almost becomes irrelevant. When people want to say that we can only have intelligent conversations about nutrition if we look at science and we look at research papers only, this is something that a doctor on the internet recently told me, is that, he wasn't willing to talk about nutrition unless it was in scientific research. He wasn't willing to look at ecology or population or culture or evolution in the conversation. That's ridiculous. That's a way to have an intelligent conversation about nutrition, is to actually try and think about and try and replicate all of the factors and conditions that go into impacting human nutrition and the way that that nutrition impacts our health on multiple levels. So this is why it's hard to explain this online in like a 5-minute video, right? Where people will ask me all the time, well, where are your studies? What are your studies? And I can produce the evidence, but it's never enough for people, because you can't be as convicted in what I'm saying and as convicted as how I feel unless you live and breathe and embody nutrition and dietetics like it is your passion, which it is mine. Because like I just explained to you, it goes so much deeper than just what is being shown in a research paper. You have to understand the evolution of nutrition research, the evolution of human diets over time in the context of what's actually being researched, to even know if it's relevant or not, or if it's contributing to the conversation in ways that are meaningful. And so how we need to study nutrition is multidimensionally. We do want to think about things like environment, because how can we be healthy as people when our environment is sick? How can we say that we're thriving and healthy when the air that we breathe and the ground that we live on and the climates that we inhabit are not? It doesn't make sense. And I'm not the only one that thinks that way. This is why there's a huge interest right now in something called the planetary health diet, which is a diet that solves our two biggest problems on the planet right now: human health and planetary health. Nothing is more important than planetary health, because if we don't solve that, we don't even need to worry about human health. And the clock is ticking. People think that I'm fear-mongering when I say this, or that I'm a conspiracy theorist, and it's like, no. The clock is literally ticking. We have until the year 2030 to make radical reform to the way that we eat into our global food supply, to meet climate change metrics set forth by the Paris Agreement, to conserve planetary health and prevent catastrophic impacts from climate change. To me, these conversations that we're sitting and having on the internet about, high protein versus low protein is so stupid. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter. Because we need to be eating in the way that best serves the environment we're in right here, right now. And that diet happens to be ideal for the planet and for human beings. And what is that diet? It's a diet that is primarily whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, healthy fats, healthy plant fats like olive oil and olives and avocado, maybe some fatty fish, optional, limited amounts of animal protein. That's what the diet is. Limited amounts of refined grains and added sugars. Whole, minimally processed foods whenever possible. That's what the diet is. That's the diet we need to be eating. There's no debate anymore. Sitting around talking about what diet is going to help us build more muscle is also stupid. Because why? That could be a whole other episode, but I'll just briefly summarize. That is also a stupid conversation. I hope that it's fine that I'm saying that, but I'm just being honest with you guys, That's a dumb conversation to me too. Because if we want to sit around and talk about what diet helps us build the most muscle, then we're neglecting the conversation about aging. And in the conversation about aging, we see that things like calorie restriction, eating less calories while still maintaining adequate nutrition is what is optimal for longevity, living a long time, anti-aging. So would you rather live a short life with big muscles or a long life with smaller muscles? And unfortunately, because a lot of men have small egos, they choose the former. And that's what's most important to them, without thinking about the bigger picture and without even thinking about if human beings are meant to carry that much muscle. Like when I have conversations about human nutrition, I'm never viewing it through the lens of what diet helps us build the most muscle, because that's not my lens as a public health dietitian. My lens is what diet is going to help us live the longest, healthiest life possible while making our environment as healthy as possible, while giving us as high of quality of life as humanly possible, which involves things like emotional health, philosophical health, which philosophical health is about actually living a meaningful life, which to me, you can find great meaning in living a life that, or in embodying a way of eating and living that is positively contributing to other people, right? Like diets that are really high in animal protein take a lot of resources. And in the spirit of community and oneness and collective, taking a lot of resources is out of integrity, out of alignment with that. So these conversations are so complex. But there is one method in the research that is very, very fascinating, and I think it would make sense to a lot of people. And I'm going to explain it to you here. And I found an article. I want to read from this article because it's a really good explanation, probably better than how I would summarize it. If you're interested in this particular article, which again, this is just one article. I could have chosen from any of the 20 tabs that I have open on my computer right now. I just thought this one was the best in terms of explaining what nutritional geometry is and why it's relevant in conversations about nutrition. So let me just scroll down and I want to read you their summary of what nutritional geometry is, if I can find it. Sorry, guys. I'm just going to do a little search function. Okay. So the geometric framework, the nutritional geometry framework, is a nutritional modeling platform that enables an integrated assessment of the impact of nutritional composition of the diet on biological parameters. In this nutritional geometry-based methodology, phenotypic responses of animals, such as body weight, adiposity, which is the amount of fat, and lifespan, to diets with different compositions are plotted as response surfaces on an n-dimensional nutrition space. So what they're saying here is, like, when you look at nutritional geometry results, they take the results of various studies and plot them in like a three-dimensional way. So it ends up looking like a mountain range, where when you see these different peaks of different nutrients, you can evaluate what's going on based on the depth that you're seeing. I don't know if I'm explaining that super well, but in the case of macronutrients, the nutritional space is three-dimensional: protein, fat, and carbohydrate dimension. And the response surfaces allow assessment of the effects of individual macronutrients as well as their interaction on biological outcomes. So this method has been successfully employed to resolve conflicting and contradictory findings in the nutrition arena. So this is where, instead of trying to compare high protein diet study to high protein diet study, when one study looked at high protein diets versus low fat diets, and one study looked at high protein diets versus high carb diets, we can negate all of that by mapping it with this nutritional geometry method and actually being able to pull conclusions out that matter, that are within the context of how we live our lives. It's really cool. And believe it or not, this method isn't super, super new. But us it's not super new, but at the same time, I don't see this used a lot in nutrition research. So I hope that that it gets to be used more and more and more. But I want to read to you, like, and if you're interested in looking at like pictures of what this nutritional geometry looks like, the title of this article is Macronutrient Determinants of Obesity, Insulin Resistance, and Metabolic Health. So as an endocrine dietitian, like that's my lens. I care a lot about the big epidemics that are making people sick and cutting their lives short, which are obesity and diseases of metabolic health like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, fatty liver disease, PCOS, all of those types of things. But I want to read to you, like, there's so much good information in here, but I'm just going to focus on protein for the sake of like what we've been speaking about, okay? I almost want to just read straight from this article because it's such a great way of putting it. But basically what they're saying is they say until recently, the role of dietary protein in the emergence of metabolic disease has been largely overlooked for two major reasons, which is exactly how I feel. We've focused on fat and we've focused on carb, and we've just like not even thought about protein, which is very interesting. Firstly, protein contributes a much smaller component of an individual's overall dietary energy budget, which is true. But the reason why I think it's interesting to look at protein is because it's so tightly regulated. So like bigger doesn't, just looking at the size of how much something takes up in the diet doesn't signify its significance. Second, protein intake has remained far more stable over time when compared to fat or carbohydrate intake, which is also true. But just because protein intake has remained stable over the last 100 years doesn't mean the diet itself or the quality of those foods is exactly identical. We eat a lot more takeout. We eat a lot more processed foods. Our animals are factory farmed. And there's lots of people eating way more than 16% protein in their diet. So what do we see? Like when there was this good study. Now, the study that I'm going to talk to you about in relation to protein is a study that is in mice, I want to say, but I want to read it to you. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find it. I should have like highlighted this right before this article. But what we find in the protein conversation is this. It is clear that dietary protein plays a key role in mediating metabolic health. Recent work, however, has highlighted that within proteins, the quantities and mixtures of amino acids are themselves powerful modulators of metabolism. So this is good. We used to look at protein as protein. And we also had this false belief that animal protein is superior to plant-based protein. But that's not true because it's actually about the amino acid composition. And so if you know what amino acids are essential and what amino acids are not essential, and amino acids are just building blocks of protein, you can get all of the amino acids that you need through plant foods. So that's not even an argument. Animal protein isn't superior in any way, and it is about the amino acid composition of the diet. And we see that like with restricting certain amino acids, ones that are found in animal protein, we have improved glycemic control and reduced triglyceride levels in mice. However, of the essential amino acids, the branched chain amino acids, these cannot be synthesized in the body. We need to get them externally, but we can get them through plant-forward diets if they're well planned. In both humans and rodents, elevated circulating levels of branched chain amino acids and related metabolites are positively associated with cardiometabolic risk factors such as insulin resistance, elevated blood sugar, obesity, and dyslipidemia. Okay, so what does that actually mean? Branched chain amino acids come directly from animal protein. Elevated levels of branched chain amino acids circulating in the bloodstream are directly tied to metabolic disease. I'm not creating this out of thin air. I'm speaking about this idea. because it can change people's lives if they understand the truth. And I see this in my clients. When they implement plant forward eating patterns, the results that they get are insane in short periods of time. Women regulating their periods in 2 weeks. Women becoming pregnant that couldn't become pregnant for years. Everybody losing weight, everybody feeling amazing. People having aches and pains that they'd almost become accustomed to vanishing. Less painful periods. Obviously, reversal of prediabetes, reversal of fatty liver disease, glowing skin, hair health, nail health. And that's not to mention the invisible things that we can't see, like disease prevention and longevity. So, and then they just honestly go on to say, like, more supporting evidence, branched chain amino acids alone. I'm not going to read any more of that, actually. All right. But basically what I wanted to say to you is that when we look at nutrition research with nutritional geometry, which is a very fair way of looking at nutrition that actually paints the total picture for us, we see over and over again, diets that are high in plants and low in animals are the optimal for human health. But more than that, we see that diets that are low in protein and high in carbohydrates are associated with longevity. I'm going to read you a sentence, okay? Studies, and again, people also like that don't understand scientific literature want to discredit animal studies, but animal studies are valuable. As long as we're understanding like how that animal's nutrition is different from our own, they're very valuable because we can't conduct these very controlled experiments on human beings. And so this sentence is saying that, and this is like across multiple studies. It's not just like one random paper. Studies in animals employing the geometric food platform have shown that low protein, high carbohydrate diets are optimal for increased life and health span. Moving forward, animal studies and human trials based on the geometric food methodology are needed for the comprehensive understanding of the impact of interaction between protein, fat, and carbohydrate on insulin and metabolic signaling and their impairment in response to an unhealthy diet. All of these studies, and there's multiple papers, like I said, all say the same thing. Lower protein, higher carbohydrate is optimal for human health and longevity. Okay? And that is, I'm talking to you guys like you're like the angry men in my comments section. You're not, but I want you to feel the fire. But honestly, it's like that makes sense because that's in alignment with the diet that the world's longest living people follow. People also want to cite ancient peoples, like people like in the paleo movement, they want to say, oh, we should be eating animal protein because ancient people did. And that is going to be a whole other podcast episode because that is so fascinating. But not all caveman diets are created equal. And also, like, they had to hunt for their food back then. And most caveman diets, believe it or not, are predominantly plant-based, where they included animals, but like it was for special occasions or like once in a while. It was not the predominant food in their diet. So I'm going to talk about that, like I said, in another episode and go through like a bunch of ancient civilizations and what their diets looked like. But to me, that's the proof of the pudding is like when we zoom way out, that's the message that we're getting. And this isn't about demonizing a specific macronutrient. The macronutrients are protein, carbs, and fat. This isn't about demonizing protein. This is just about saying that our obsession with it is misplaced and that our excess consumption of it is not without consequence. And that if we want to live our longest, healthiest lives possible, that includes a diet that is predominantly plant-based with the option for animal protein in moderate quantities. This isn't an all or nothing thing, you know? But once you understand the research in detail and you start eating in a more plant-based way, it does inspire a lot of people to want to lean that way, like myself included. Over the years, I've gone through so many iterations plant-based diets, and currently I'd say I'm like 90% vegan. I kind of oscillate between vegetarian and vegan, and I feel amazing. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I also want to share, this is also an interesting sentence, that increasing carbohydrate to around 65% and reducing protein to 11% led to the lowest level of mortality. People, and just so you know, like, what percentage of protein am I talking about when I'm talking about low protein? I'm thinking in my mind, like, because this isn't a black and white answer, I have to acknowledge the current nutrient density of foods available to us. I also want to formulate my response in a way that is approachable to the majority of people in the public. Like, for me as a dietitian, I could feel confident getting all of the nutrition I need eating an 8% protein diet. I don't know if everybody could. So when I talk about lower protein intakes, I'm talking about 10 to 15% protein. That's the amount of protein that the World Health Organization recommends. Like, it's only in America that we recommend 10 to 35% of our diet be protein, and then people want to go even above and beyond that because of our obsession with it. What I'm recommending is what the World Health Organization recommends. I should have led with that, right? 10 to 15% dietary protein is what I'm talking about. And I'm talking about getting the majority of your protein from plant-based sources and limiting animal-based sources of protein, especially red and processed meats, especially those two. Because we don't see the same level of impact from white meat and fish, although the more plant-based people are, the healthier they are. So, but you get to do this on a spectrum and you get to make it your own. But I hope that this episode shed some light on how complicated this conversation is, and maybe even like illuminated for you why there are so many conflicting opinions when it comes to nutrition, and maybe gave you some confidence that the way that I look at nutrition science makes sense, and I look at it in a way of actually thinking about what's going to benefit human beings. And that's what I got for you guys. So let me know what you think of this kind of conversation. I'd love to hear from you guys on Instagram in DMs, or if this is on YouTube, comment below the video. Let me know what kind of topics do you want me to talk about? What kinds of topics are most interesting to you? Do you prefer conversations more about psychology, mindset, and emotional health? Do you prefer conversations about nutrition and biology and human health? Do you like conversations about environmentalism and ecology and diets of ancient civilizations? Maybe you like a little bit of all of it. I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, I would appreciate it so much if you'd share it with a friend or give it a 5-star rating and write a review. That would really help with getting these episodes out to more people. And I am sending you so much love wherever you are in the world. Have an amazing day.